In this video, we will talk about a topic that will be important for all of anatomy and physiology. This topic is homeostasis. We are going to break this topic down into the following points. First, we'll look at what the conditions that our body and cells need to survive are, and we'll see how they make sure that we stay at these conditions even though the conditions might change. So for example, it might be dry or humid outside, it might be hot or cold, but basically we're going to see how our bodies maintain a stable internal environment in the face of these changing outside conditions. In order to live, all the cells in our body normally need some nutrients, oxygen, and water, among other things. Of course, we need to eat, drink, and breathe to satisfy these demands. Why do the cells in our body need these materials? Well, I will not cover that in great detail in this video, but it has to do with the chemical reactions that occur in each cell. The life of many of our cells and our survival also depends on relatively stable internal environment. We can only tolerate small changes in our internal temperature or blood pressure or a host of other conditions or variables. If you have an iPhone and have ever left it on a hot surface for too long, you may have seen this message shown on the slide. Our bodies are no different, and our cells cannot survive for a long period of time if they're overheated. The machinery inside the cells simply will cease to work correctly under adverse conditions. This might seem like common sense and common knowledge. You probably know that your normal body temperature is around 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. For the rest of the video, I'll mostly be sticking to the metric system, so get used to thinking in terms of Celsius. We can go outside in cold weather, but the inside of our bodies stay warm and around this temperature of 37 degrees. If you stay out too long in the cold, your internal temperature will drop and you might get frostbite. Likewise, staying outside in the heat too long has other adverse effects. You might get a heat stroke. The bottom line is that extreme changes in temperature, especially when it's an extreme change in the internal temperature of our body, will damage cells and could even result in death. Now, probably everybody here and listening to this video has been out when it was either too cold or too hot. But clearly you were able to survive these conditions. You know that when you're cold, you shiver uncontrollably, and you sweat when you are overheating. These changes, as we'll see in a moment, are your body's way of trying to counteract the drop in temperature in the case of being cold, or the increase in temperature in the case of overheating, and keep your internal cells at a nice 37 degrees Celsius. Our bodies have the ability to respond to changes in either the internal or external conditions to maintain the normal levels of temperature, blood pressure, pH, salt content, and other features that are important or necessary for life. This ability to respond to these changes and remain balanced is known as homeostasis. One way to remember this term and what it means is to think of a home. In a home, you might have systems built in to help keep you comfortable. You might have an air conditioner for when it is too hot outside, a radiator for when it is too cold. You can have a humidifier or a dehumidifier if needed, and you have lights for when it's dark outside. These things allow you to keep your home in a sort of homeostasis. No matter what the conditions outside are and how they change, you can keep the inside of your home well lit with a nice at a nice 22 degrees Celsius temperature, which is about 72 Fahrenheit, and with a balanced humidity. You might not even need to manually change these settings, turning on or off your air conditioner, for example. Some things, like the radiator, will turn on automatically and only turns on when it becomes colder than 22 degrees in the house. We will come back to this point in a moment, a point of how these different systems respond to the changes. Our bodies also exhibit homeostasis. So consider what happens to you if it's really hot outside. Something in your body recognizes that the temperature outside is high, and that it would be dangerous and you'd overheat if your body didn't respond in some way to this change in temperature. This signal leads your body to respond by producing sweat. The evaporation of your sweat draws heat energy from your body and lowers your internal temperature back down to a normal level. In a similar fashion, your body can detect a drop in internal temperature instead of a raise. This causes involuntary shivering, and this movement can generate small amounts of heat, thus warming you up back to a normal temperature. Muscle movement does produce heat, so think about what happens when you work out or go for a run or otherwise engage your muscles a lot, even when you're not cold. This raises your temperature above normal and you sweat. We can generalize this process. Homeostasis requires 3 general steps. First, some receptor detects the change in the environment. Second, the receptor signals to some sort of control center. The control center will be able to recognize if the change is too big and can make a decision to try and respond to adjust the variable back down to a normal level. If a response is needed, a signal is sent to what is known as an effector, and an action is taken to restore normal conditions. Let's walk through this process again, more slowly and with more detail. A change, or stimulus, produces an imbalance in our body in some variable. The imbalance could be that the temperature is too high or too low, or that our blood pressure is too low, or our salt content is too high. The stimulus, again, is simply the change in some variable. Our body is equipped with all different types of receptors, and each can detect one or more different types of stimulus. The receptor sends information about the variable, like temperature, to the control center. The information traveling from the receptor to the control center is traveling along what's known as the afferent pathway. If the control center decides to respond to the stimulus to fix the imbalance, it sends a signal to the effector in the afferent pathway. One way to remember the differences between these pathways is that the efferent goes to the effector. You could also remember that affecting something is to change a feature about something. For example, you are affected by hearing a moving song. It's a change within the object. Effect, however, is the end result of a change, or it is the action or the direct consequence of that action. The response by the effector will bring the variable back into balance with the rest of the body and restores everything to the homeostatic level. Two examples of this that we have already seen is the response of our bodies to a shift in temperature. The heat stimulus is detected by the skin, and a part of the brain interprets this change and responds by activating sweat glands. The skin also detects a temperature imbalance in the other direction, when it is too cold. And the brain again interprets the change but responds differently this time by causing shivering movement until the temperature returns to normal. The symptoms of a lot of diseases and disorders occur because something is interfering with homeostasis, the body's normal process for maintaining balance. One everyday common example is that of a cold sweat and shivering during a fever or an infection. If you have ever experienced the chills of a fever despite not physically being exposed to the cold, you will be familiar with this failure of homeostasis. During some infections, the normal temperature set point of the body, normally 37 degrees, in the temperature control center of your brain is changed to a higher temperature. Let's say this sort of thermostat in our brains is moved from 37 degrees centigrade up to 40 degrees, which would be about a fever of 104 Fahrenheit. Now, even in normal conditions, your brain will think that you are too cold because your body is not at the level of 40 degrees Celsius, and will respond to your skin and rest of your body saying that internal temperature is 37 by making your muscles shiver until your body reaches its fever temperature of 40 degrees Celsius. These are the chills that you experience during the onset of a fever. You might even sweat the fever out later when the control center is reset to 37 and the brain realizes it must lower the temperature back down to normal. In the examples we have covered so far, you may have noticed that the response is only activated until the balance is restored. At that time, it is shut off. If you are hot and you begin to sweat, you do not continue to sweat forever, but rather you'll stop once your body temperature is returned to the set point of 37 degrees C. This type of control mechanism is known as negative feedback. Our bodies use negative feedback mechanisms and positive feedback mechanisms to make sure that the effectors function with the type of response and the timing that is needed. The negative feedback response helps stop effectors from doing too much. On the flip side, positive feedback can get effectors to generate very intense and rapid effects. Most of the examples we've talked about so far, in fact, used negative feedback. Negative feedback is common in our body, as it helps get the result needed without wasting energy or overshooting the mark. Even the example of a thermostat and a radiator in a home is an example of negative feedback. Positive feedback is less common, but it is still found in our body. In positive feedback, the response by the effector exaggerates the original signal. This leads to an amplified or faster response, otherwise known as a cascade effect. One example of this is blood clotting, where a leak in a blood vessel must be rapidly repaired. Contractions during labor also exhibit a positive feedback control strategy, where each contraction leads to more frequent and more intense contractions afterwards during a labor until the final moment where the child is born. To review, remember that homeostasis is your body's ability to maintain stable internal conditions despite a changing outside environment. Think of the home with a thermostat. Your body acts in a similar way, although it has different receptors, control systems, and effectors. In the examples we talked about, the skin detected temperature changes and the brain decided either to activate sweat glands or to cool off or to activate shivering movements in the muscles to warm up. Your body usually maintains homeostasis by controlling effectors in a negative feedback fashion, which helps conserve energy. Positive feedback is sometimes used for fast and intense responses, but it is not as common.